Hey guys, happy Monday when this will be posted. Today I want to talk about happiness outside the church. I saw a post from Mormon News Roundup, and it's a little confusing because I don't really know exactly where Mormon News Roundup stands. I think because they're very critical of the church in a lot of ways, but also like they sometimes do things where they still seem like they're active TBM kind of stuff. So I'm not really sure exactly where they stand. I think it's a great channel. I followed them for a long time. It's not my most trusted source. It's not my most watched, most enjoyed, but I followed them for a long time. So I saw this post from them, and they asked why Mormon stories. Why do Mormon? This is what they asked. Why do Mormon stories episodes seem to follow familiar formula? Guests often share how leaving the church made them happier, but where are the stories of regret or struggle? Is every ex-Mormon really thriving, or does the Open Stories Foundation filter out narratives that don't fit their positive framework? Comments ranged, and I'm talking about Instagram, so if you want to go look them up on Instagram. Facebook, they posted the same thing on Facebook. It had a couple of comments, but not too much. Instagram is where there's like a ton of comments. So if you want to look them up there, the comments ranged from, correlation is not causation, and maybe the ones who are happy are just more likely to be the ones who are sharing their stories versus people who aren't happy. Or maybe unhappy people find their way back, so therefore they don't really count as ex-members, or they're thriving in the Mormon community, and so they're not really, talking about it in the ex-Mormon community or in a public forum. That's where they share their promotion story, their faith promoting stories, is in Relief Society and Elders Quorum and Sunday School, which is true because I've heard tons of stories. When I was an active Mormon, people talked all the time about their faith promoting stories, about how they were less active, or how they had a conversion story where they were not really believing, but then something happened, and then now they have this strong testimony. So the platforms where they're sharing those things are just different, and I kind of want to talk about my own thoughts on this. Sometimes correlation is not causation, but also sometimes that's exactly what it is. Now, I can't speak for absolutely everyone. I can only speak for myself. But I think that in I feel like my experience is pretty typical. I have spent several years consuming literally thousands of hours of ex-Mormon media, and I think that it's safe to say that I am pretty typical. And so it's at least a good answer for a fairly large demographic. We did struggle. We do struggle. Leaving was not easy. I actually have gay friends who have said that leaving the church was harder to tell their parents about than coming out to them. Many of us lost community and family and faith. My husband's family basically shunned us for several months. They came around, but it's not really quite the same anymore. And we were excluded for several months of family parties, meetups, and activities, and that was very hurtful. There are people who have lost their jobs because of leaving the church. Now, I think the percentage is fairly small because the majority of people who, in the church don't work for church offices or, like BYU. Some people have lost jobs because of that, though. That's really tough. We lose friends, we lose community, we lose the security of faith that tells us why and how and future of literally every question we could possibly have. We lose that. And for me, it was actually a super relief, not a disaster. But for my husband, that was something he struggled with. So we lose people, we lose things, and we struggle, but then we figure it out. If you talk to an ex-Mormon who is newly out, and by newly out, that qualifier can vary from person to person. I've been out almost a year and I'm adjusting super well and I love my life. So for me, I feel like a year is a good long time. Honestly, I have a few things I want to say. I still have stuff I want to say. I want to get my Mormon story completely told. I want to have a few other things I want to talk about. But I'm moving on very well. I don't think that I'm going to be around forever and ever doing this like, John DeLynn, whose life, thankfully, because he is very needed, is, dedicated to this kind of a thing. I am probably going to move past it and move on. But then, like, I married my husband after 6 weeks of dating. So personalities really play into what newly out means. But, somebody who's newly out might tell you a different story about how difficult life is right now versus someone who's been out for a while. But my opinion is that we did struggle. And when we found out, we found our new normal, we built new communities. And here's the biggest kicker. All of the problems I currently have are not problems that I didn't have in the church. I know there's a lot of negatives in there. I'll repeat, all the problems I currently have are not problems that I didn't have in the church. Most of my problems in life aren't spiritual. I stress over my job. I stress over finances. I stress over my children and their needs and doctor's appointments. My son came home from college for a couple of weeks at Christmas time, and he had a filling fall out. So we needed to get that fixed. And I took him to the dentist and got that refilled and found a couple new cavities that, he needed to get done down in Cedar City where he lives, because he wasn't going to be up here long enough to get that done. And he's a brand new adult. Like, my daughter's turning 20 this year. And so she's had a couple of years where she's been on her own and she's figured things out. He just turned 18 in July. So he's new to all this, and this is kind of the first thing he's had to set up by himself. So I had to kind of follow through consistently on that. And, that's stressful. I can't be down there and help him and hold his hand. And those kinds of things are struggles that I currently have. If I was a member of the church still, that would still have happened. And if you think that my son's cavities happened because of a punishment from God for not being a member or something, then, I want you to know that people get cavities when they're in the church. Like, why does that happen if this is going to be a punishment for my kid? And also, like, I have some science about soda for you to read. My husband had foot surgery in August that damaged some nerves, and his recovery has been very difficult and much longer than it should have been. And it's fine. It is what it is. But when we were active, he had a knee surgery, which caused a blood clot to go to his lung, and he could have died. So, like, what's the difference between that stress issue and this stress issue? Like, nothing. There's nothing different. The struggles aren't more difficult because we're out of the church. I'll also say this, my financial worries are absolutely lessened since leaving the church. They aren't all gone or solved, especially in today's economy and what's happening with the world and United States right now. That's going to get worse, but they're definitely lessened. As a family, we were paying around $600-ish per month just for tithing, not counting fast offerings or other donations we made. That's a hefty amount of money that helps us support our family without requirements to pay to play, right? I also think that there's this idea of, if something happens, like a tragedy when you lose a family member or you lose a job, the church is there as a community and they'll help you get food and stuff. We have a very beloved friend and neighbor who came over after we left and said, hey, if anything happens, I'm going to make sure that you still get help from the church. And I think that even though there are a lot of problems with the way the church gives charity, for example, regardless of what my friend said to us, and as kind and loving and heartfelt as he meant that to be, he doesn't get to choose that me and my husband, he doesn't get to choose that. He's not in charge of that. And my husband and I are not active members. We don't pay tithing. And we've removed our records from the church altogether. We're not even just inactive members. So we most certainly would not get food from the storehouse. We just wouldn't. And the Relief Society might offer to bring us some dinners, but it would be like 3 max. The church is very stingy in their help and with their help and service. Like I said, like in the Relief Society might offer to bring some meals, but it would be like 3 because like they're not even like, hey, we're going to send this around. And if you want to bring one and let the entire room bring one if they want to, they're like, there are 3. You can sign up for one of those. if you want. Like, you know, like when a mom in an active ward has a baby, that's what they do. They're like, after that, her husband can help, her teenagers can help, you know. And they teach that in lessons and in church, that self-reliance is what is expected, meaning that if you have a spouse or teenagers or extended family, that's where you should go first. And that's for active members. Never mind people who aren't active or aren't members at all. So even active members who are convinced that the church does the utmost good in the world and donates so much money, etc., they are very aware of this difficulty and stinginess in getting help from the church. And so they are unable to imagine that a different community might be more supportive and more giving and more helpful than the church without expecting something back for it. But in reality, those communities are out here thriving. And I think that to some degree, Mormon News Roundup is operating under the assumption that people like need this kind of community on a regular basis and that they can't get it. And so they're left high and dry and sad and lonely. And that may be true if you're like, I don't know, like you lose your job when you've been out of the church a month and you haven't had enough time to rebuild your community. But for me and my family, not only do I have extended family who are supportive and helpful, and like even my husband's family who, you know, we're past the point where we're being shunned or anything like that. And we are, you know, we trust them and they're loving and they are not going to let us by any means go homeless or hungry. You know, like we have that kind of extended family who are supportive. Like I actually have several different, very rich, not financially, just like interactively, very satisfying, very validating communities that I participate in now. I know that if I have some kind of need, my communities are going to fill it for me, and I will fill their needs as well. This is the definition of community. And I just, you know, just because a person doesn't have the church as a community doesn't mean that they don't have other community. So yeah, like I think there is this misunderstanding when ex-Mormons say they're happier outside the church. People think they're just saying there isn't any kind of struggle. And that is not what anyone is saying. We do struggle. It's just that we don't have to do it under the oppression and the financial burden and the guilt and the extra responsibility because of callings, time strain, because of meetings and activities and so on. And then most of us, once the initial shock and the loss wears off, we begin building those communities back up. Yeah, I was super lonely and hungry for community for a while, but now I found my people and I feel very free, very safe, very comfortable, and not the same for me politically, but as far as my community goes, I feel that safeness. Someone asked Mormon News Roundup that if they think it is such a filtered and curated concept, maybe they should find some ex-members whose lives fell apart and interview them. Mormon News Roundup responded, and I'm quoting, I don't have the resources. That's a little bit of a cop-out. Burden of proof is on you, friend. There are thousands of Mormon stories and ex-Mormons who haven't been involved with Mormon stories who are saying they're happier. And I personally haven't run across any ex-members who are overall unhappy. Are there probably people who are unhappy? Are there people who wish they didn't leave? I've 100% heard Mormon Stories episodes where people say they wish they could go back to being ignorant about the things because they miss the church. And that's valid. But they can't go back because they can't align their morals with the church. You know, and are they happy? I don't know. I hope that they've reached a point where they can be happier. And don't forget, like, it's possible to be happy and still miss what you had when you belong to a previous community. More than one thing can exist at once. In one of the interactions I had on their post, Mormon News Roundup said, I asked why this particular narrative dominates the show, and weirdly, I still don't have a straight answer. I mean, where are the people who left, spiraled into addiction, lost everything, ended up in jail, and are now begging to be rebaptized? Surely someone out there regrets leaving, right? Yet crickets. We will never know because these stories don't get an episode. Well, there are over 184 comments with people giving answers on Instagram. So I don't know why they don't feel like they have a straight answer. There are many plausibilities, including the realistic possibility that spiraling out of control and becoming addicted and in jail and losing everything is the fear tactic used by the church leaders to keep us in there. And when people leave the church, they typically find that this just frankly is not true or realistic path. Like how I was taught that if I drove without my garments on, I would be in an accident. Perhaps people all over the planet drive every day without garments. Some people have accidents. People wearing garments have accidents too. People without garments drive their whole lives without having any accidents. And someone who becomes addicted and loses everything and goes to jail probably has a lot more in their life to blame, like abuse, neglect, genetic predisposition, and bad choices and so on for their spiraling than just leaving the church. There are probably some people who have had that experience, but I truly just feel like people leaving the church aren't doing it so that they can go do heroin and hold up a bank. They want to drink coffee or beer maybe and wear a tank top. If you're hearing crickets, it's probably because the ones who do exist who regret leaving are so few and far between that it's statistically inconsequential. Anyway, I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on this whole take about ex-Mormons being happier out, or, are you a person who left the church and then went back and like your life spiraled out of control because you were out of the church and you've reintegrated or something like that? I'd love to hear your story. So please comment, let me know what you think. Thank you so much for your time and for listening. Think terrestrial, and I'll talk to you soon.